The story opens on the ecumenopolis of Meridian Station, a massive orbital hub where dozens of species converge for trade, diplomacy, and commerce. The station itself is a marvel of engineering and cultural compromise, a sprawling structure of interconnected habitats, each designed to accommodate the environmental needs of different species. There are pressure chambers for the aquatic viridian merchants, atmospheric enclaves for the silicon-based crystalline collective, and countless climate-controlled zones for the thousands of organic species that call the galaxy home. The station orbits Kepler 442, a stable star system that serves as a nexus point between three major galactic powers and dozens of independent colonies and corporate interests. The protagonist, Dr. Marcus Chen, is a xenoanthropologist in his late 40s who has spent the last 2 decades studying first contact protocols and cross-species communication. Once idealistic and hopeful about humanity's place in the galactic community, Marcus has grown disillusioned after witnessing countless failed negotiations, cultural exploitation, and the commodification of sentient beings by wealthier, more technologically advanced civilizations. His earliest research was celebrated. He published groundbreaking papers on communication with pre-technological species and developed frameworks for ethical integration that earned him multiple awards and speaking invitations across the galactic academic community. However, his idealism gradually withered as he watched his ethical frameworks be twisted into justifications for exploitation, as he saw beings he had studied and befriended subjected to labor camps and experimentation, and as he recognized that academic prestige meant nothing when confronted with systemic injustice backed by corporate power and governmental indifference. He now works for the Galactic Heritage Foundation, underfunded nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting indigenous species and preserving cultural autonomy. The foundation operates on a budget that sounds substantial until one realizes it must cover operations across multiple star systems and coordinate with hundreds of indigenous civilizations. Marcus's influence is minimal in a system dominated by corporate interests and imperial governments, whose annual expenditures dwarf the Foundation's entire budget. He spends his days writing reports that are filed away, giving presentations to sympathetic academics who share his frustrations, and occasionally meeting with indigenous species leaders to offer counsel that they often cannot afford to implement. The state of Marcus's personal life reflects his professional decline. His marriage ended 5 years ago. His ex-wife, Jennifer, eventually tired of his obsessive commitment, a cause that produced no tangible results, and left him emotionally unavailable. He has no children, a fact he sometimes mourns and sometimes sees as a mercy, given the state of the galaxy he would be bringing them into. He lives alone in a small apartment with an impressive library of xenoanthropological texts and field recordings, his sanctuary from a world that feels increasingly hostile to the values he has dedicated his life to defending. His colleagues at the Foundation respect him, but sometimes view him as a cautionary tale, the idealist whose idealism has calcified into bitterness. Marcus arrives at the Meridian auction house on a gray morning, though morning is an arbitrary designation on a space station where time is regulated by administrative decree rather than celestial mechanics. The auction house is a sprawling complex where exotic goods, technology, and controversially sentient beings are bought and sold under the guise of cultural exchange agreements, integration programs, and research partnerships. Legally, the sale of sentient beings is prohibited by the Galactic Sentience Accord of 8847, a treaty signed by most galactic powers. However, the agreement contains enough loopholes that entire markets have emerged within those lacunae. Beings can be sold if they are classified as uncontacted, and therefore yet considered participants in galactic civilization. They can be leased for research purposes. They can be transferred as part of cultural integration program, where wealthy species pay to study the native culture of others. The auction house is neutral ground, technically outside the jurisdiction of any single government, making it a haven for black market dealings and morally questionable transactions that skate along the edges of legality without ever quite crossing the line in ways that bring serious legal consequences. The auction today is special, and Marcus has come specifically because of intelligence reports the Heritage Foundation received about the item being sold. A rare specimen has been captured from the unexplored verdant forest of Kepler 442b, a world known for its dense, dangerous jungle ecosystem and rumors of undocumented intelligent life. The verdant forest moon is protected by international accords, making any capture technically illegal, but enforcement is lax and bribes ensure silence. The reports suggested something remarkable. Not merely exotic, but something that could reshape understandings of sentience and communication itself. Marcus felt compelled to witness this event. Even though he knew his presence would likely be helpless and observational, Marcus sits in the observation gallery, a tiered section of seats behind transparent aluminum barriers designed to keep the merchandise from easily accessing the audience. The gallery is filled with the usual crowd of bidders, corporate research directors looking to study alien physiology, exotic collectors seeking rare prestige items to display in private collections on distant homeworlds, wealthy industrialists hoping to establish resource claims on her homeworld through possession of a native specimen, and intelligence operatives trying to understand the technological capabilities of newly discovered species. The atmosphere is clinical and dehumanizing. No one in the gallery refers to the being they're about to auction as she or uses any name. She's referred to as specimen HFY in official documentation, the wild asset in casual conversation. Bids are placed with the same emotional detachment one might bring to purchasing industrial machinery. Marcus feels the familiar weight of helplessness settle on his shoulders. He has attended perhaps 40 such auctions over his career, always hoping that this time would be different, that perhaps the galactic community would collectively develop a conscience about the trafficking of sentient beings. It never happens. He calculates his organization's annual budget in his mind, approximate 47,000 credits allocated across research, advocacy, legal fees, and operational costs. The bidding for a single specimen typically starts at 500,000 credits. He cannot afford to seriously compete against the corporations. His organization cannot afford for him to spend resources this way. He tells himself he is here as an observer, as a witness to injustice. It feels like useful rationalization for his own powerlessness. As the auction begins, the stage lights reveal the subject of the bidding, a being unlike anything officially documented in xenoanthropological records. She appears vaguely humanoid but distinctly alien. Her skin has a subtle bioluminescent quality, shifting between deep emerald and midnight blue depending on the angle of light. Her eyes are large, multifaceted like an insect's but expressive in a way that suggests profound intelligence and awareness. She wears minimal clothing, rough fibers that suggest they were woven or gathered naturally rather than manufactured. Most striking is her demeanor. She is not frightened or submissive as the auction house marketing materials had promised potential buyers. Instead, she watches the bidders with a mixture of curiosity and defiance, her posture proud despite the restraints binding her wrists. She turns her head slowly, surveying the gallery with what appears to be analytical interest. When her multifaceted eyes over Marcus, there is a moment of seeming recognition, not of him personally, but of something he represents. The auctioneer, a Korvax named Selmoth, whose species is known for their neutrality and their willingness to facilitate transactions regardless of ethical considerations, begins the bidding at an absurdly high price point, 750,000 credits. This is clearly a deliberate strategy, attempting to drive interest among the wealthiest players and establish an expectation of premium pricing. Bids come rapidly from research consortiums, collection agencies, and industrial mining operations. Each bid pushes the price higher, climbing through 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million credits. Each new bidder represents a different form of exploitation. Nexus Biotech plans to study her physiology and neurology, hoping to unlock genetic sequences that could revolutionize human medical science. The Crystalline Collective expresses interest in understanding her carbon-based biochemistry from a comparative perspective. A private collector from the Meridian Elite offers bids that suggest plans for something between museum acquisition and decorative status symbol. Marcus watches with a sense of tragedy and numb resignation, knowing that within hours, this being will be removed from the auction house and begin a life of captivity or experimentation. He considers leaving, unable to bear witness to another injustice. But something about her makes him stay. Perhaps it is the way she holds her head, the intelligent gleam in her multifaceted eyes, or the subtle way her bioluminescent skin pulses in patterns that might constitute communication or might simply be an autonomic response to stress. Or perhaps it is the moment when her eyes pass over his again, and he feels, irrationally, that she is asking him for something. The bidding reaches 8 million credits. The auctioneer is clearly pleased. This will be record-setting for this venue. A corporate representative from Nexus Biotech, a woman named Reeves, with the polished appearance of someone whose career has been entirely in comfortable climate-trolled offices, makes what appears to be a final bid, 3.2 million credits. The auctioneer begins the traditional countdown, asking if there are any further bids, moving through the ritualistic phrasing that precedes the falling of the gavel that will complete the transaction. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus raises his hand. The action is impulsive, driven by emotion rather than logic or rational calculation. He doesn't have nearly enough credits in his personal account to compete with the corporations. His annual salary is approximately 5,000 credits, and his savings account contains 180,000 credits accumulated over 2 decades of academic work. But the gesture feels necessary, like a refusal to accept the inevitability of her fate without at least one voice saying no. The gesture surprises even himself. He feels detached from his own action, watching himself raise hand as if observing another person. The auctioneer acknowledges his bid with a mixture of surprise and mild amusement. Everyone in the room recognizes his affiliation with the Heritage Foundation, an organization too powerless to be taken seriously as a competitor in high-value acquisitions. Some observers in the gallery actually laugh, a quiet, dismissive sound that suggests they view his bid as either performance art or a profound mistake born of sentimental naivete. However, the bidding continues. The representative from Nexus, Reeves, counterbids 3.5 million. Marcus raises his hand again, offering 3.7 million. He has no plan for how he will pay this amount, but he is operating from pure conviction now, a belief that someone must stand against the system, even if that someone is just one underfunded scientist with a moral compass and dwindling credits. The bidding escalates with each exchange. Marcus is no longer thinking rationally. He is operating from pure conviction, and his hand rises with mechanical regularity. He is no longer bidding to win but bidding to protest, to declare through the only language this system understands money, that this being's life has value beyond market price. He reaches his maximum savings, 4.2 million credits. Reeves counters hers with 4.5 million. Marcus closes his eyes, knowing he has reached the limit of his resources, preparing to lower his hand and accept defeat. Then his phone vibrates. A message arrives from Dr. Elena Rostova, the director of the Heritage Foundation. She has been monitoring the auction remotely. Clearly someone at the organization had flagged this transaction as significant. Her message is terse. Emergency fund authorization. Bid up to 5.2 million. Board approves. We'll discuss later. Do not let them take her. Marcus, stunned, processes this information in the seconds before the auctioneer calls for further bids. He raises his hand again, 5 million credits. Reeves hesitates, calculating. At this price point, the return on investment becomes increasingly questionable, even for well-funded corporations. She confers briefly with her superiors via communication device, then shakes her head. Nexus withdraws. The gavel falls. Marcus is declared the winner. For a moment, there is silence in the gallery as observers process what has just occurred. Then a cascade of reactions. Some observers applaud quietly, recognizing the symbolic victory. Others look disgusted, viewing it as wasteful sentimentality. Corp representatives begin making phone calls to their superiors to explain why they lost the acquisition. Reeves approaches Marcus as he is being directed toward the administrative office to complete the paperwork and payment processing. She says, quietly and with genuine respect, that was a foolish thing to do, and also perhaps the right thing to do. I hope you understand what you have purchased. Marcus, still operating in a haze of adrenaline and disbelief at his own actions, doesn't respond. He simply proceeds with the transaction, signing documents, authorizing payment transfers that will take years to repay through salary deductions. When Marcus finally takes possession of the being, whose alien designation in the official records is incomprehensible to human vocal apparatus, a series of harmonic tones and clicks that when rendered phonetically becomes Irth Kelsha, he immediately learns that his problems are just beginning. The auction house provides minimal information, a vague chemical analysis of just testing silicon and carbon-based hybrid biochemistry, notation that she appears to subsist on a diet of plant matter and certain insects, and a brief note that she demonstrated remarkable and low agility in handlers during transport, despite limited socialization. Marcus rents a private recovery in the station's medical district, typically used by injured travelers or beings requiring specialized medical care during extended stays. He pays a premium to secure the largest available suite and negotiates additional amenities, access to environmental controls, permission to modify the space, and crucially privacy from station authorities and corporate inquiries. The first thing he does is contact Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a xenolinguist he has worked with for years and whose discretion he trusts. Tanaka arrives within hours, carrying portable analytical equipment and a cautious expression that shifts to wonder when she sees Iris for the first time. The first challenge Marcus and Tanaka face is attempting to communicate with her. She does not speak any of the galactic standard languages. In fact, her vocalizations are unlike anything either of them has encountered in their professional lives. She produces a series of clicks that vary in frequency and duration, harmonic tones that seem to resonate through her entire body, and subsonic rumbles that Marcus can feel more than hear, vibrating through the deck plating of the suite. When they play recordings of Standard Galactic, she watches with what appears to be comprehension but shows no inclination to replicate the sounds. Instead, she studies Marcus and Tanaka intently, her multifaceted eyes seeming to catalog every aspect of their appearance and behavior, the way they move, the way they gesture, the quality and rhythm of their speech. Physically, Marcus discovers she requires specific environmental conditions that differ significantly from human comfort parameters. Standard station, climate control, moderate temperature, standard atmospheric composition, artificial lighting in the visible spectrum causes her visible distress. Her bioluminescent skin becomes dim and unstable, flickering with what appear to be pain responses. She becomes restless, pacing the small medical suite with increasing agitation. Through trial and error and reference to the limited data from Kepler-422b, Marcus attempts to modify the environment. He increases humidity to levels that make the suite feel almost rainforest-like, introduces specific light wavelengths that fall outside the normal human comfortable spectrum but activate her bioluminescence more vibrantly, and arranges for imports of living plants and native soil from the verdant forest moon. During this process, Marcus and Tanaka begin to understand that she is not simply an animal or a specimen in the clinical sense. She demonstrates problem-solving abilities that suggest higher cognition. When Marcus provides her with materials, plant fibers, stones, she begins to construct objects. Woven structures that serve no immediately obvious function, but display sophisticated understanding of material properties and structural principles. Patterns created in the soil that suggest aesthetic sensibility, and intricate arrangements of plants and stones Marcus recognizes as similar to some forms of human garden design. She watches them work and seems to learn from observation. When Tanaka to repair a piece of equipment, the being watches intently, and when given tools afterward, she demonstrates an understanding of mechanical principles and that goes far beyond her instinctive imitation. Over the course of 2 weeks, a precarious routine develops. Marcus spends hours in the suite, attempting to establish rapport. He brings her food he has researched from Kepler-442e's Documora, and she either consumes it or deliberately rejects it. Her choices suggest discerning taste rather than indiscriminate hunger. She seems to have preferences and is willing to make those preferences known through refusal. When he plays music, different genres and instruments, from classical human compositions to electronic synthesized sounds to field recordings of luminary harmonic exchanges, she responds with visible interest. Her bioluminescent skin pulses in patterns that occasionally seem to synchronize with the music's rhythm, creating an effect of shared aesthetic experience. Marcus begins to suspect that her communication is partially musical, that her clicks and tones follow linguistic patterns, but in an entirely different modality than human speech. Tanaka conducts careful linguistic analysis, recording the being's vocalizations and looking for patterns. She discovers that the clicks, tones, and rumbles do indeed follow structured patterns consistent with language. There are recurring sequences that appear in different contexts, variations in pitch and duration that seem to carry meaning, and what appears to be grammatical structure underlying the apparent randomness. The linguistic analysis is complicated by the fact that the being's communication seems to involve physical as vocal components. Her posture changes seem to carry meaning. Her bioluminescent patterns shift in ways that might encode information. And sometimes her communication seems to involve the modification of her immediate environment, moving objects or arranging materials in ways that might be communicative gestures. The legal complications mount quickly. On the second week of Marcus's possession of the being, whom he has privately begun calling Eris, based on the iridescent quality of her skin, the Galactic Commerce Authority initiates an inquiry. They question his ownership claim, suggesting that the auction violated verdant forest moon protections, and that the specimen should be surrendered to a government research facility for proper cataloging and study. Marcus's response is firm. He argues that the being is not a specimen, but a sentient individual, that the auction was illegal, and that surrendering her to government authorities would compound the original crime rather than remedy it. Corporate lawyers representing the auction house contact Marcus with threats and offers of buyouts, hoping to retrieve Iris and complete their original transactions. They argue that he made a binding purchase, that Heritage Foundation funds were used without proper authorization, and that legal complications could be avoided if he simply accepts a substantial payment for returning the being. Marcus refuses repeatedly and contacts the Heritage Foundation's legal team, discovering that the organization's director, Rostova, has already mobilized lawyers in anticipation of these threats. The Heritage Foundation's director also warns Marcus that the organization is under scrutiny. Multiple governments have begun questioning why a nonprofit organization is suddenly involved in high-stakes specimen possession and are threatening to revoke their operating licenses on various stations. The financial cost of Marcus's action is beginning to become clear. The emergency fund authorization will take years to repay, and if the foundation loses its operating licenses, its entire mission will be compromised. Rostova tells Marcus directly, "I authorized the purchase because something in my gut told me it was right. But I need you to understand that you may have just destroyed this organization. I hope you can live with that." Marcus also discovers, through unofficial channels and contacts developed over his career, that the auction house has been deliberately withholding information about Iris's origin. She was not simply found or discovered in the verdant forest, but was specifically hunted and captured by a freelance team that had received encrypted coordinates suggesting knowledge of her location. This implies that her species, her civilization, is not merely unknown, but perhaps deliberately hidden or protected by someone with resources and knowledge. The question of who revealed her location and why becomes increasingly troubling as Marcus considers the possibilities. Was she betrayed by a member of her own civilization? Is there a larger conflict occurring that her capture represents? The turning point of this section comes when a representative from the Kepler 442b Indigenous Rights Coalition contacts Marcus through secure communication channels. The coalition is a loose alliance of various sentient species and their advocates dedicated to protecting uncontacted civilizations from exploitation. They are simultaneously impressed and disturbed by Marcus's purchase of Iris. They inform him that the being he has purchased is named iridescent through canopy light, in the harmonic language of the Luminari people, though they have learned she prefers the shorter designation Eris when interacting with non-native speakers. She is a member of the Luminari people, an indigenous civilization that has deliberately maintained isolation from galactic contact for reasons that remain unclear: cultural choice, historical trauma from previous contact attempts, technological vulnerability, or some combination of these factors. The capture and sale of Iris is, according to the coalition, a violation of Kepler 442b's sovereignty and an act of interstellar crime that would normally trigger military response from the Luminari civilization. However, the coalition explains that the Luminari have chosen strategic restraint, taking time to gather intelligence about what occurred rather than responding with immediate military action. The coalition offers Marcus a choice, though not in the gentle way that phrase typically implies. He can surrender Iris to the coalition, allowing them to facilitate her repeople. He can work with them to restore her home while navigating the legal, illegal, and political minefield his purchase has created. Or he can attempt to keep her, in which case both he and his organization will face serious legal consequences from multiple governments and likely will not survive the political pressure. Marcus agrees to work with the Indigenous Rights Coalition, but this decision plunges him deeper into moral and political complications. The coalition assigns him a liaison officer, Commander Tesh, a Valdis warrior and veteran of several first contact missions. The Valdis are a species evolved in a high-gravity environment on a world with extreme weather patterns, resulting in a physiology that emphasizes strength, resilience, and direct communication. Tesh is skeptical of Marcus's abilities and intentions, viewing human involvement in alien affairs as generally catastrophic. Their relationship begins antagonistic, with Tesh questioning every decision Marcus makes regarding Iris's care and his approach to communication. Tesh suggests that Marcus's impulse to bid for Iris was rooted in paternalistic savior mentality, that removing her from the auction house only transferred her from one form of captivity to another, and that Marcus should immediately transfer her to the coalition without further delay. However, as they work together over weeks, a grudging respect develops between them. Tesh comes to recognize that Marcus's commitment to Iris's autonomy and dignity is genuine, even if his methods are sometimes clumsy or ineffective. Marcus begins to appreciate Tesh's directness and her complete lack of pretense. She says what she believes, acts according to her principles, and does not burden others with expectations of gratitude. They form an unexpected partnership, with Tesh's military precision complementing Marcus's academic analysis. The first major obstacle they face is determining how to communicate with Iris and, more importantly, understanding what she actually wants. Marcus had assumed that returning her to her home would be what Iris desired, but this assumption proves dangerously reductive. Over weeks of interaction, Marcus, Tesh, and Tanaka begin to decode elements of Iris's communication system. They work intensively, sometimes for 12 hours at a stretch, attempting to establish basic understanding. They use pictographic representations, attempting to communicate through visual symbols and spatial arrangement. They experiment with harmonic resonance, using synthesized sound generators to reproduce elements of her vocalizations. They combine approaches, developing a hybrid communication system that allows for rudimentary exchange of ideas. What they learn complicates everything. Iris does not want a return to her home, at least not immediately, and not unconditionally. She was, in fact, a deliberate seeker of contact with the galactic community. She had ventured away from her civilization's territories and into the dangerous reaches of the verdant forest, specifically to encounter other intelligent beings. The Luminari civilization maintains strict borders, and journeying beyond them without official sanction is apparently contrary to their cultural norms. But Iris did it anyway, driven by curiosity and a desire to understand the broader universe. When she was captured, rather than being traumatized in the way one might expect from a being raised in isolation, she was, in her own complex way, seeing it as an opportunity to achieve her goal, albeit through morally corrupted means. She tells Marcus and Tesh, through their developing communication system, that she has heard whispers, rumors that travel through the Luminari civilization about the vast galaxy beyond their borders, about other species and other ways of thinking and being. However, the coalition explains that her people do not know that Iris was taken by force. They believe her dead, lost in the dangerous jungle to predators or accident, or some other misfortune. A search and rescue team is being organized to investigate her disappearance, and presumably to recover her body or determine her fate. The political situation is deteriorating rapidly. If the Luminari discover Iris was sold into slavery by galactic entities, they may interpret it as a declaration of war, or at minimum, a profound violation of their sovereignty that demands formal response. Intelligence suggests that the Luminari possess technological and military capabilities that rival or exceed the most advanced galactic powers, and their decision to remain isolated has kept that power out of competitive market forces. If they decide that contact with the broader galactic community means exploitation and enslavement, they might choose aggressive isolation rather than controlled engagement. Marcus is faced with an unprecedented ethical dilemma that has no clean resolution. He can facilitate Iris's return home and face potential interstellar conflict when her people discover the circumstances of her capture. He can help Iris achieve her goal of engaging with galactic civilization, but this would require protecting her from exploitation and ensuring she maintains agency in how and with whom she interacts, a complex task given the predatory nature of galactic commerce. Or he can attempt a third path, using Iris's unique position as a bridge between civilizations to establish formal first contact protocols that respect both her autonomy and her people's sovereignty. This third option is theoretically appealing, but practically overwhelming in complexity. Meanwhile, complications arise from multiple directions simultaneously. The corporate interests that lost the auction have not abandoned their goals. A faction within Nexus Biotech and the auction house employs a mercenary team to attempt a retrieval operation, hoping to recapture Iris and complete their original transactions through illegal means now that legal channels have been exhausted. The operation is sophisticated and well-funded, involving infiltration of the station's security systems and an understanding of the suite's layout. However, Tess' military expertise proves invaluable. She anticipates the approach, prepares defensive measures, and when the mercenaries attempt the infiltration, Tesh and station security overwhelm them. Several mercenaries are captured, others escape. The operation fails due to Tesh's preparedness and the Coalition's intervention. It demonstrates conclusively that Marcus is now a target, and that corporate interests will not accept possession of Iris as final. Threats against Marcus' life escalate. He receives messages, some through official channels, some through anonymous digital systems promising consequences if he does not relinquish Iris. His apartment is broken into, nothing is stolen, but the clear message of violation remains. He is forced to move constantly, living in safe houses provided by the Coalition, while Iris remains in a secure facility overseen by Tanaka and protected by Valdez security specialists. The stress takes a physical toll on Marcus. He develops insomnia, loses weight, and begins experiencing anxiety symptoms he has never previously encountered. Tesh forces him to see a therapist specializing in trauma and stress, a gruff crystalline entity who communicates through harmonic resonance and advises Marcus that his stress response is neurologically sound, but psychologically destructive. You must accept you cannot control outcomes, the therapist tells him. You can only control your actions. Control. During a particularly tense moment, Marcus is captured by corporate security forces during what appears to be a routine station transit. He is drugged and transported to a secure location where he is brought before Castellan Vex, the CEO of NES Biotech Industries. Vex is not an antagonist in the conventional sense. He is not evil or irrational, which some ways makes him more dangerous than a traditional villain. He is a true believer in the system of exploration and exploitation that characterizes galactic corporate culture. He explains, with genuine conviction and even passion, that his interest in Iris is scientific and beneficent. Her biology contains genetic sequences that could revolutionize medical science, potentially allowing human extension of healthy lifespan or cure of genetic diseases. Her neural structure might unlock secrets of consciousness itself, answers to questions philosophers and neuroscientists have struggled with for millennia. Her culture could provide technological insights that would benefit all civilizations, especially humanity, which he views as having special potential within the galactic community. Vex offers Marcus an enormous sum of money enough to clear personal debts and the Foundation's emergency fund in a single transaction, and a position ahead of Nexus' Xenomental Research Division. Marcus will simply step aside and allow Iris to be brought their facility voluntarily. Vex emphasizes the word voluntarily, suggesting that Iris would be free to refuse cooperation and that any research would involve her consent and participation rather than coercion. He makes the argument seductive. Marca's ideals about protecting indigenous species are admirable, but ultimately futile in a system larger than any individual or organization. Why not work within the system, ensuring that at least Iris's exploitation is conducted ethically, rather than stubbornly refusing cooperation and ensuring worse outcomes? Marcus refuses, but Vex's arguments create intellectual turbulence within him. The conversation haunts Marcus for weeks afterward. Is his resistance to Iris's study rooted in genuine ethical principle, or is it also rooted in a kind of paternalistic protectiveness that might itself be a form of oppression? Is he denying Iris the opportunity to make her own choice about participating in scientific research? What if she genuinely wanted to contribute to scientific understanding? What if his refusal to allow her involvement in research is a form of condescension, an assumption that she cannot make informed decisions about her own participation? Tesh, during a heated discussion about this sometime later, challenges Marcus directly. You assume she wants freedom from study. You assume she wants isolation from galactic civilization. Have you asked her what she wants? Or are you deciding for her what she should want? That seems very much like the paternalism you claim to oppose. The question haunts Marcus because he realizes that in his effort to protect Iris from exploitation, he may have simply replaced corporate paternalism with his own benevolent paternalism. He decides that he must engage Iris in genuine conversation about what she wants for her own future, even if her answer is uncomfortable or complicates his moral framework. During the rising conflict, Iris also begins to change in profound ways. She learns Standard Galactic with surprising speed, her mimicry and pattern recognition abilities allowing her to acquire the language much faster than anticipated. Within 6 weeks, she can engage in basic conversations. Within 3 months, she can discuss complex ideas, though her accent remains heavily influenced by her harmonic native language, giving her speech a musical quality that Marcus finds beautiful. She becomes increasingly curious about galactic society, asking pointed questions about politics, technology, history, and culture. She expresses interest in learning combat skills from Tesh, philosophy from Tanaka, and cultural history from Marcus. More provocatively, she begins asking to leave the secure facility and experience galactic civilization directly, to visit markets, to observe different species and cultures, to understand the broader context of the universe she has been hidden from. This request creates significant friction between Marcus and the Coalition. Many Coalition members argue that Iris should be immediately returned to her people. They view her desire to explore the galaxy as manipulation or the internalization of colonial propaganda. How could a being raised in cultural isolation truly understand the consequences of engaging with a vast, complex galactic civilization? Others wonder if Iris even has the capacity to give true consent. Some wonder if Iris's desire for exploration is even authentically her own desire, or if it has been unconsciously shaped by her exposure to human and other species' cultural values and representation of a romanticized galaxy out there. Marcus brings these concerns to Iris directly, wanting to give her the opportunity to respond to the skepticism about her agency and autonomy. Her response is remarkably thoughtful for someone who has only recently acquired galactic language. She says, through a combination of harmonic vocalization and standard galactic speech, "You cannot protect me from bad choices by preventing all choices. If I have been influenced by exposure to galactic culture, then I have been influenced. That is not negation of agency. That is the condition of all learning and growth. Yes, I might make choices that harm me. But that is my right. The right to be wrong is part of what makes a choice truly mine." The culmination of the rising conflict comes when Iris makes a unilateral decision that shocks everyone involved. She goes to the Coalition and declares intention to petition for first contact status as an independent representative of the Luminari people. She will facilitate communication between her civilization and the galactic community, but on her terms and with explicit protections for her people's autonomy and sovereignty. She refuses to be studied without explicit consent protocols. She refuses to be confined. She demands recognition as a citizen of the galactic community with all associated rights. She further demands that any research involving her or her people be conducted under strict ethical frameworks, that provide for her full participation and understanding. Her declaration is bold, informed, and articulate. It is also, in Marcus's view, impossibly naive about the forces she is proposing to negotiate with. Her declaration is accepted by the coalition, though with reservations. Formal petitions are filed with the Galactic Sentience Accord governing body, requesting recognition of the Luminary civilization as galactic participant and granting Iris diplomatic status as their representative. The paperwork alone takes weeks to process, and at no point is anyone certain that the petition will be accepted, or that Marcus's complex actions have culminated in anything other than further complications. The climax erupts when Iris's declaration reaches the Luminary civilization. A massive diplomatic vessel emerges from what space charts indicate is empty space, decloaking near Meridian Station with such abruptness that it nearly causes collisions with several civilian cargo transports. The Luminary vessel is breathtaking and terrifying in its implications, a structure that suggests technological sophistication far beyond what most galactic powers had theorized the Luminary possessed. The ship is beautiful in an organic way, its surfaces flowing and alive seeming, bioluminescent patterns flowing across its hull like communication, or perhaps merely aesthetic expression. The Luminary arrive not with aggression, but with something more unsettling. Bewilderment mixed with what appears to be profound cultural shock and potential offense. Iris's decision to pursue independent first contact violates fundamental principles of their civilization's philosophy, which prioritizes collective decision-making and cultural continuity above individual agency. The Luminary leadership, a council of elder beings whose communication occurs through shared harmonic resonances that create visible light patterns in the air around, demands an explanation for Iris's actions and the circumstances of her capture. They are especially disturbed to learn that she was captured by other species, bought and sold like an object on a market, and then rescued by humans and others who unilaterally made decisions about her welfare without consulting her people in seeking their knowledge about her nature and capabilities. In their perspective, every faction involved in Iris's journey, the mercenaries who captured her, the corporations that bid for her, the coalition that protected her, and Marcus himself, has committed violations against her autonomy and their sovereignty. To the Luminary, rescue is not different from capture if both are imposed externally without the participation of the individual or their civilization in the decision-making process. The revelation that Iris was willing to engage in first contact and chose to do so is less reassuring to them than one might expect. Instead, it raises troubling questions about whether she was mentally compromised by her captivity, whether the exposure to galactic influences had altered her judgment, whether choice could truly be considered authentic given the context. The Luminary leadership isolates Iris, insisting on lengthy formal discussions to determine what has happened to her psychologically and culturally during her captivity and exposure to galactic civilization. These discussions are conducted in formal settings, with Luminary elders present and various galactic representatives observing but not participating. Marcus is not permitted to see Iris during this period, which stretches over nearly 3 weeks. The isolation is intended as protective and diagnostic, but from Marcus's perspective, it feels like another form of captivity, another removal of Iris' agency, as those claiming to protect her make decisions about what she can and cannot do. During this period, Marcus is brought before a joint tribunal consisting of representatives from the Galactic Commerce Authority, the Luminary Council, the Indigenous Rights Coalition, and various governmental bodies. He is accused of theft of Iris from her people, unlawful detention, unauthorized first contact, and violations of multiple interstellar statutes. The trial is not a judicial proceeding in any traditional sense, but rather a complex negotiation conducted through legal frameworks and political pressure. The proceedings are public, broadcast across galactic networks, and Marcus becomes simultaneously famous and infamous, depending on the perspective of observers. Castellan Vex testifies, framing Nexus's interest in Iris as a simple case of property rights violation, and suggesting that corporations have a legitimate claim to compensation for the disrupted auction. He argues that Marcus's emotional decision prevented legitimate scientific research and poses the question to the tribunal. If we accept that uncontacted species have the right to remain uncontacted, what happens to the scientific imperative to understand the universe? How do we balance the rights of indigenous peoples with the rights of the broader galactic community to knowledge and advancement? During the tribunal, testimony emerges that contradicts the simple narrative of Marcus as a hero and all other actors as villains. A representative from the Heritage Foundation reveals that Marcus had no authorization to make the purchase, that he acted entirely on impulse and emotion driven by idealistic commitment but without pragmatic planning. His decision has cost the organization millions in legal fees, emergency fund authorizations, and lost partnerships with various governmental agencies. The organization's operating licenses have been suspended in 3 major star systems, threatening its core mission. Coalition members testify that Marcus's actions, while well-intentioned, created diplomatic incidents that set back first contact negotiations by years. The Luminary Council expresses frustration that external parties made decisions about Iris without their input. Even Tanaka acknowledges that her collaboration with Marcus may have constituted research on a sentient being without proper consent frameworks. The most devastating testimony comes from Iris herself. She stands before the tribunal, a being who merely weeks ago was property in an auction house, now recognized enough to speak in a galactic forum, and delivers a statement that fractures everyone's certainties. She acknowledges that Marcus's initial purchase was morally wrong, that the auction and capture were violations of her autonomy and her people's sovereignty. She acknowledges that the coalition's paternalism, while preferable to corporate exploitation, was still a form of control and decision-making imposed upon her. She acknowledges that her own desire for exploration was partially informed by external influences. The stories told by Marcus, the music she heard from other species, the exposure to different ways of being and thinking. However, Iris also argues something unexpected. She argues that despite the moral failures of all parties involved, her current situation represents something unprecedented and valuable. She is a being in genuine flux, genuinely free, within limits, to make choices about her own future, with multiple legitimate perspectives challenging her simultaneously. She argues for a novel legal category, first contact liaison, a status that would grant her formal recognition as a representative of her people, autonomy to make decisions about her own participation in galactic affairs, but also responsibility and accountability to both galactic institutions and her own civilization. She proposes a specific arrangement: long-term residency on Meridian Station, where she can facilitate dialogue between the Nari and the galactic community while maintaining her connection to her people through regular communications and visits. She proposes that any research involving her be conducted with her full participation and understanding, with the results shared with her civilization, and with explicit protocols preventing exploitation. She proposes that she be allowed to travel, to study, to grow, while maintaining cultural ties to her people. She does not propose easy answers or simple solutions, but rather a working arrangement that acknowledges the complexity of genuine cross-cultural contact. The tribunal is forced to confront a reality it was unprepared for. Iris is not to be solved, but a person to be negotiated with. She cannot be saved by any faction, because she does not require saving in any simple sense. What makes her situation genuinely complex is that she is demonstrably wrong in some of her assumptions about galactic civilization's intentions, about her people's ability to remain isolated indefinitely, while simultaneously being genuinely wise in her recognition that, including herself, operate from incomplete information and must navigate ethical ambiguities. The climax doesn't resolve with clear victory or defeat, but rather with multiple simultaneous agreements. The Luminari formally enter into a first contact treaty with galactic institutions, with extremely rigorous protections for their cultural autonomy and territorial boundaries. Technology and resources from their territory are off-limits without explicit negotiation. Cultural practices are protected from exploitation or study without consent. The treaty is stronger than previous first contact arrangements and sets new precedents for protecting indigenous species rights. Iris is granted first contact liaison status, giving her a unique legal position as both a galactic citizen and a representative of an indigenous civilization. This status carries responsibilities. She must report to both galactic authorities and her own civilization's leadership about interactions and developments. Marcus faces sanctions but is not prosecuted, with the tribunal acknowledging that his impulse to bid for Iris, while legally problematic and organizationally costly, prevented a more catastrophic outcome in which she would have been subjected to corporate research programs with no oversight whatsoever. The Heritage Foundation's license is reinstated in most jurisdictions, and its funding is increased specifically to establish proper protocols for first contact situations. New guidelines are established for how uncontacted species should be treated, though enforcement remains inconsistent. However, the climax contains genuine tragedy. Corporate entities are not punished significantly. Nexus Biotech pays fines and agrees to protocols for future first contact situations, but no executive faces serious consequences. The systematic exploitation of sentient beings continues. What changes is that it becomes slightly more regulated and slightly more expensive. This incomplete justice is perhaps the most realistic and most troubling aspect of the climax. Systemic injustice does not end with one victory, but rather is incrementally checked and challenged, often incompletely. 6 months after the tribunal, Marcus finds himself in a state of strange liminal existence, neither celebrated nor condemned, but existing in a complex middle ground of recognition and ambiguity. His actions have made him simultaneously famous and infamous in various circles. Human media portrays him as a hero who challenged corporate exploitation. Xenological journals discussed first contact protocols with both admiration and critical scrutiny, and universities offer him positions in ethics departments and xenanthropological research programs. However, Marcus feels the weight of his own complications acutely. He was not a hero in any pure sense. He was an impulsive man who spent his organization's emergency funds on a decision-driven, emotional conviction that happened to align with larger ethical principles. He wonders if he is receiving praise for being right or for being fortunate, for making the correct moral choice, or for getting lucky with outcomes. His personal life has shifted in ways both positive and complex. Jennifer, his ex-wife, reaches out to him after hearing about his actions. She apologizes for her decision to leave, acknowledging that his commitment to principle, however frustrating it had been in their marriage, was genuine and valuable. They meet for coffee and have a long conversation about what might have been and what could potentially be. They do not reconcile, but their relationship evolves into a form of friendship, and Marcus finds unexpected peace in this development. His other relationships also shift. Colleagues at the Foundation who had maintained distance from his more radical positions now seek his counsel and input. Iris has established herself in a new diplomatic wing of Meridian Station, built specifically for luminary galactic commerce and communication. The construction of this facility represents in itself a significant acknowledgement of luminary importance and unique status within galactic affairs. Iris has become fluent in Standard Galactic and 3 other common languages, while also teaching elements of her own language to interested parties, creating the first formal study of luminary linguistics and communication. She is brilliant at negotiation, combining her people's harmonic communication style with logical reasoning and genuine empathy for multiple perspectives. She has become something of a celebrity in certain circles, a symbol of successful first contact and cross-species cooperation, though she is uncomfortable with this celebrity status and works to redirect its attention from herself toward the substantive agreements being negotiated. Iris has also become something of a cultural phenomenon among younger beings from various species who are curious about integration and cross-cultural communication. They attend her informal seminars where she discusses philosophy, culture, and the nature of identity. Iris explores questions about what it means to belong to multiple cultures simultaneously, about how identity shifts when one encounters radically different ways of being, about the relationship between individual choice and cultural continuity. She forms genuine friendships with several beings from different species and develops a complex intellectual and emotional life that extends far beyond her role as first contact liaison. Marcus and Iris interact occasionally at official functions and coalition meetings. Their conversations are respectful and warm but carefully bounded, as if both recognize that the relationship that developed during her captivity cannot be carried forward into her newfound independence. When they do speak, there is genuine affection, but also recognition of the power imbalances that characterize their earlier interactions. Iris has explicitly told Marcus that she values the role he played in her liberation, but that she cannot continue a relationship that is rooted in her dependency and his rescuing impulses. She tells him, with kindness but firmness, "I will always care for you, but I cannot be grateful forever." Gratitude transforms into resentment when it becomes the foundation of a relationship. "I need to know you as a person separate from the circumstances of my capture and rescue." The Heritage Foundation has used Marcus's notoriety and the tribunal's outcomes to secure additional funding and governmental support. Dr. Yuki Tanaka has been appointed head of a newly established interspecies communication division, and the organization is now developing comprehensive protocols for first contact situations that prioritize the autonomy and rights of indigenous species. These protocols are not perfect. They still operate within systems fundamentally structured around galactic power dynamics, and their implementation is inconsistent across different jurisdictions. However, they represent a meaningful shift toward recognizing that first contact is not an event, but an ongoing relationship between relative equals rather than conquerors and conquered. The protocols include provisions for informed consent, consultation with indigenous communities before contact, protection of cultural artifacts and practices from exploitation, and mechanisms for indigenous species to determine their own level of engagement with galactic civilization. The protocols are not universally adopted. They are beginning to influence best practices across multiple research institutions and governmental agencies. Marcus serves as the primary architect of these protocols, working with Iris, Tesh, Tanaka, and representatives from various indigenous species to ensure that the guidelines reflect genuine commitment to autonomy rather than merely superficial ethical frameworks. The Luminari gradually begin engaging with the broader galactic community, though carefully and with substantial wariness that Marcus finds entirely justified. They establish trade relationships, focused on specific materials and technologies they choose to exchange, scientific exchanges conducted according to strict protocols they develop, and cultural ambassador programs similar to Iris's role. However, they maintain significant portions of their civilization completely off limits to external contact, and they establish technology sharing restrictions that prevent their most advanced developments from being acquired or reverse engineered by other species. These boundaries are respected by most parties, though some corporations and governments express private frustration at the limitations on what they can access or study. Marcus takes on a new role as Director of First Contact Ethics at the Heritage Foundation. In this capacity, he works directly with species entering first contact with the galactic community and provides consultation to diplomatic missions navigating cultural integration. The work is often frustrating in ways both predictable and unexpected. He encounters systematic resistance to genuine cultural respect from corporations and governments that view ethics as obstacles to profit rather than principles worth following. He repeatedly witnesses situations where indigenous species are coerced or manipulated into agreements that benefit larger powers, sometimes overtly through threats, sometimes subtly through economic pressure, and the creation of perceived necessities that can only be fulfilled through disadvantageous agreements. However, he also encounters situations where his principles are challenged by beings making choices he perceives as self-destructive or unwise. In one memorable case, a newly contacted species, the Kituri, voluntarily sell mining rights to their homeworld to a corporation in a deal that provides economic benefit but involves significant environmental damage to their ecosystems. Marcus brings his concerns to the Kituri leadership, arguing that the long-term costs outweigh the short-term benefits. The Kituri respond by asking whether Marcus is truly respecting their autonomy if he continues to argue against their choice after they have made an informed decision. They point out that Marcus is exhibiting exactly the paternalism he claims to oppose, believing he knows better than they do what is good for their civilization. This encounter devastates Marcus more than he expects. He cannot prevent the Kituri from making what he believes is a destructive choice. He can only document it and ensure that the species made an informed choice. He realizes that genuine respect for autonomy sometimes means accepting outcomes that contradict one's own values and principles. This realization forces him to confront uncomfortable truths about the limits of his influence and the necessity of accepting human and alien imperfection and the right to fail. A turning point in Marcus's resolution comes when he receives a message from Castell and Vex. Nexus Biotech has, contrary to expectations based on initial behavior, actually used the company's increased first contact protocols budget to establish a legitimate research institute dedicated to studying xenobiology, with full consent frameworks and no extractive practices. Vex explains in a video message that he and Marcus actually agree on more than they disagree. Both want to understand alien biology and culture and to advance scientific knowledge. The difference, Vex acknowledges, is in methodology and respect. Vex invite Marcus to collaborate on a joint research initiative that would respect both scientific rigor and ethical boundaries. Marcus is initially suspicious, having lived through corporate betrayals and recognizing that Vex's reputation is built on exploitation. After thorough investigation by the Heritage Foundation's legal team, however, Marcus discovers that Vex's institute actually has implemented its principles with surprising integrity. While Marcus is skeptical of Vex's motivations, he recognizes that the institute's work is producing legitimate scientific knowledge without exploitation. Marcus declines direct collaboration, but agrees to serve as an ethical advisor and consultant, recognizing that systemic change sometimes comes through unexpected alliances, and that purity of principle must sometimes be balanced against pragmatic effectiveness. Tesh, the Valdis commander, becomes Marcus's closest friend. They discover they share a similar frustration with the glacial pace of systemic change and a similar cynicism about whether their efforts actually matter in the context of vast interstellar politics. They bond over long conversations about the meaning of resistance and small victories in the face of overwhelming systemic injustice. Tesh reveals that she has decided to leave the official coalition and start an independent organization dedicated to protecting uncontacted species through active intervention rather than passive diplomacy. She asks Marcus to be her civilian advisor and primary ethical consultant. He agrees, recognizing that while his diplomatic approach has value, sometimes systemic injustice requires more aggressive intervention. The resolution also involves Marcus confronting his own trauma and emotional patterns through sustained therapeutic work. Through sessions with a counselor who specializes in cross-species psychology and trauma response, he works through his need to rescue and control others, recognizing that his impulse to bid for Iris, while ethically grounded, also came from a need to be a savior figure and to feel his life has significance and meaning. He works on accepting that meaningful change often comes through slow, imperfect processes, and that individual acts of conscience are valuable precisely because they are small, local, and human scale, not because they single-handedly fix vast problems. He learns to sit with ambiguity and incomplete outcomes, recognizing that this is the fundamental condition of ethical action in complex systems. By the end of this section, Marcus has reached a kind of peace with his situation, though not contentment or satisfaction. He is not a hero, but he is also not a failure. He is a human being navigating impossible ethical situations with incomplete information and doing his best to remain true to principles he believes in while acknowledging their limitations. The world around him has changed incrementally, slightly more just, slightly more aware of the rights and autonomy of indigenous species, slightly more resistant to casual exploitation. Whether this change will prove meaningful in the long arc of galactic history is unknown, but it exists, and in some way, Marcus is part of that existence. 2 years after the tribunal, Iris stands in her diplomatic office on Meridian Station, watching reports flow in about luminary contact expeditions into galactic space. Her people have established several permanent diplomatic outposts, key trade hubs, and scientific exchanges are beginning fascinating collaborative research projects that respect intellectual property rights while allowing genuine knowledge sharing. Her people are not fully integrated into galactic civilization. They maintain distinct identity and boundaries, but they are engaged in genuine relationships with other species on terms that feel mutually respectful. Iris is proud of this development, though she carries complicated awareness that her own choices influenced her people's trajectory that could not have been fully anticipated. She wonders sometimes if she truly led them toward enlightenment, or if she simply exposed them to influences that made resistance seem futile, or, conversely, if her advocacy for measured engagement prevented them from responding with military aggression to the violations they experienced. She carries the weight of her own agency and influence, recognizing that the decisions she advocates for have ripples that extend far beyond her personal life and impact her entire civilization. A message arrives that troubles her deeply. A deep space exploration team has reported discovering another species, even more isolated than the Luminari, existing in a stellar nursery at the galactic core. The species appears to possess vast intelligence and technology, but has absolutely no contact with the wider galactic community and appears to actively avoid detection. The discovery has been classified, but word is spreading through diplomatic channels. Various galactic powers are debating protocols for approaching this unknown species, and several propose aggressive first contact methods or technological infiltration to study the species before attempting direct communication. Iris is being consulted about first contact protocols and asked to advise governments on how to approach this unprecedented situation. She recognizes immediately that the cycle of discovery and contact that resulted in her own capture is about to repeat with another species. She requests Marcus's presence in the planning meetings, recognizing that his experience, both his successes and his failures, will be relevant to a new situation with greater wisdom. When Marcus arrives at Iris's office, they share a look of understanding. They both recognize that they are about to repeat the process they have just navigated, but with higher stakes and greater complexity. More importantly, they recognize that their story, the story of a being captured and sold, of humans learning about their own capacity for both exploitation and genuine ethical commitment, of first contact as a process rather than an event, is not a conclusion but a prologue. Iris tells Marcus something that haunts him. When we find the next species, I will advocate for their right to isolation if that is their choice. But I also wonder if the isolation is truly their choice, or if it is a choice made for them by historical accident and circumstance. How do we know if what we call cultural autonomy is actually cultural autonomy, or just the absence of information about alternatives? Marcus responds thoughtfully. That question never resolves. You just keep asking it and acting with integrity despite the uncertainty. In the final scene, Marcus's Iris prepare for a diplomatic journey to the galactic core to participate in the initial contact expedition. She packs with the efficiency of someone who has learned to navigate multiple worlds and represent multiple peoples. She stops before leaving and embraces Marcus briefly, a gesture that contains affection, gratitude, and intentional distance. She says, "For raising your hand. And thank you for eventually lowering it, letting me choose whether to raise my own." As Iris departs, Marcus receives a communication from Tesh. Another species has been discovered in conditions of exploitation, and they need Marcus's expertise immediately. The cycle continues, incomplete and messy, but perpetually asserting that beings deserve autonomy, that contact between civilizations can be based on genuine respect rather than exploitation, and that human capacity for conscience, while limited and often insufficient, is real and valuable. The story ends not with resolution, but with ongoing commitment to imperfect principles in an imperfect universe, with the understanding that the greatest human achievements are often the quiet, sustained decision to keep raising one's hand against injustice, to keep lowering it to let others choose their own path forward.